A simple act of kindness. The late afternoon sun hung low in the sky, casting a golden-orange hue over the quiet streets of Corey Mitchell's neighborhood. The rhythmic squeak of sneakers against the pavement filled the air as Corey dribbled his worn basketball, his fingers instinctively guiding the ball's bounce with each step. Sweat glistened on his dark skin, the remnants of an intense basketball practice still clinging to him. 15-year-old Corey was used to the weight of responsibility resting on his young shoulders. Life had never been easy, but in the past few months, it had gotten even harder. His mother, a nurse working double shifts at the local hospital, barely had time to rest, and his father, once a proud mechanic, had been laid off when the shop he worked at shut down. Bills piled up faster than paychecks, and though Corey never spoke about it, he knew his parents were struggling to make ends meet. Still, he never let it show. He wasn't the type to dwell on what he couldn't change. Instead, he focused on what he could, keeping his grades up, practicing basketball in hopes of earning a scholarship, and doing his best to help out at home. Even if it meant skipping out on hanging with his friends after school to watch his little sister, Maya, while his mom worked. As he turned the corner onto Maple Street, his favorite park came into view. The old playground stood silent now, the once vibrant swings rusting with time, but it held a special place in Corey's heart. It was where he had learned to ride a bike, where he had won his first basketball match against his best friend Marcus, and where his father used to take him and Maya when they could afford weekend picnics. Lost in thought, Corey barely noticed the small dark object lying on the sidewalk a few feet ahead. It wasn't until he nearly stepped on it that he came to a halt, his eyes narrowing as he knelt down. A wallet. It was old brown leather, worn from years of use. The edges were frayed, and it had a deep crease in the middle, as though it had been stuffed into a back pocket too many times. Corey hesitated for a moment, then picked it up, his fingers running over the smooth surface. Looking around, he saw no one in sight. The street was quiet, the few parked cars sitting empty, their owners nowhere to be seen. Curious, Corey flipped the wallet open. Inside, he found a neatly folded stack of bills, at least a couple $100s in crisp 20s. His breath hitched. That was a lot of money, enough to cover groceries for a week, enough to help his mom with the electric bill. For a split second, temptation whispered in his ear. Nobody would know. He could take just a little, maybe $20, just enough to help. After all, wasn't he doing it for his family? But just as quickly as the thought entered his mind, he shoved it away. That wasn't him. He had been raised better than that. Shaking his head, Corey turned his attention to the ID tucked into the wallet's inner pocket. Bernard Holloway. The small laminated card revealed the face of an elderly man, gray hair, deep smile lines, and wire-rimmed glasses perched on the bridge of his nose. His address was listed just a few blocks away. Corey glanced back down at the money, then sighed and snapped the wallet shut. Returning it was the right thing to do. Tucking the wallet into his pocket, Corey picked up his basketball and turned in the direction of Mr. Holloway's home. As he walked, he wondered about the man. Did he live alone? Was he worried about his lost wallet? Did he even realize it was gone yet? After a few minutes, Corey found himself standing in front of a small brick house with a white picket fence. The home looked well kept, but there was something about it that felt lonely. The curtains were drawn, and the porch light flickered weakly, as if it hadn't been replaced in years. Taking a deep breath, Corey rang the doorbell. A long pause followed. Then, after what felt like forever, the door creaked open. An elderly man stood before him, his face lined with age, but his deep brown eyes still sharp. He peered at Corey with a mixture of curiosity and caution. "Can I help you, son?" he asked, his voice carrying a slight rasp. Corey cleared his throat. "But yeah, I found this on the sidewalk down the street." He pulled out the wallet and extended it. "It had your ID in it, so I figured it was yours." Mr. Holloway's eyes widened as he reached for the wallet, his fingers trembling slightly. He opened it and let out a breath of relief. "My goodness," he murmured. "I hadn't even realized I dropped it." He looked up at Corey, his expression unreadable. "You brought it all the way here just to return it?" Corey nodded. "Yeah, it didn't feel right to keep it." For a moment, silence stretched between them. Then, suddenly, the old man chuckled, a deep, warm sound that made Corey relax. "You're a good kid," Mr. Holloway said. "Not many would have done the same." He reached into the wallet and pulled out a crisp $100 bill, holding it out to Corey. "Here, take this as a thank you." Corey's eyes widened, and he immediately shook his head. "Oh, no, sir. I can't take that. I just wanted to make sure you got your wallet back." Mr. Holloway's smile grew, his eyes twinkling with something that looked like admiration. "You remind me of someone I once knew," he said softly. Then, nodding to himself, he tucked the bill back into the wallet. "Well, how about this? Let me buy you a milkshake sometime. Least I can do for an honest young man like you." Corey grinned. "I'd like that." As he turned to leave, he felt lighter. It wasn't much, but today he had done something good, and that was enough. But as he walked away from the house, he failed to notice the figure watching him from across the street. Dark eyes followed him, narrowing with interest. And just like that, Corey's simple act of kindness became the first step into something much bigger than he could have imagined. A knock at the door. The morning air was still crisp as Corey Mitchell sat at the kitchen table, lazily swirling his spoon through his half-eaten bowl of cereal. The faint hum of the refrigerator was the only sound in the small kitchen. Sunlight streamed through the worn curtains, casting warm streaks of gold across the peeling linoleum floor. His mother, Vanessa Mitchell, stood by the counter, sipping coffee from a chipped ceramic mug. She looked exhausted. She had come home late last night from a double shift at the hospital, and Corey knew she probably had another long day ahead of her. "You okay, Ma?" he asked, breaking the silence. She sighed, rubbing her forehead. "Just tired, baby. Work's been rough. The hospital's short-staffed, and it seems like no matter how many shifts I pick up, we're still playing catch-up with these bills." Corey nodded, a familiar pang settling in his chest. He wished he could do more. At that moment, a loud, sharp knock at the front door shattered the quiet morning. Vanessa frowned, setting her mug down. Who could that be this early? Corey had the same question. His heart thumped uneasily as he pushed back his chair and got up. He wasn't expecting anyone. Peering through the front window, his stomach flipped when he saw two police officers standing on the porch. One was a tall, broad-shouldered man with a clean-shaven face and dark sunglasses perched on his nose. The other, a woman with sharp features and keen, searching eyes, stood beside him, hands resting lightly on her belt. Corey's mind raced. What were the police doing here? "Ma." He turned to his mother, who had already moved to open the door. "Good morning, ma'am," the female officer said, flashing a badge. "Detective Reyes. This is Officer Tanner. We're looking for Corey Mitchell." Corey felt his mother tense. "He's my son. What's going on?" Reyes turned her gaze toward Corey. "Son, we need to ask you a few questions. Do you mind stepping outside?" Corey swallowed, his pulse quickening. His mother put a protective hand on his shoulder. "Ask him here," she said firmly. "He's a minor. Anything you have to say, you can say in front of me." Reyes exchanged a glance with her partner before nodding. "That's fine. We just need some information regarding an incident from yesterday." "An incident?" Corey asked, confused. "Did you return a wallet to a Mr. Bernard Holloway yesterday evening?" Corey blinked. "Yeah, I found it on the sidewalk near Maple Street and took it back to his house." Tanner pulled out a notepad. "And what time was that?" "Around 5, I think." "Why? Did something happen?" Ray studied him closely before answering. "Mr. Holloway was found unconscious in his home last night. His house was broken into." Corey's stomach dropped. His mother gasped. "Oh my God. Is he?" "He's alive," Ray assured them. but he was injured. He's currently in the hospital, recovering. We're trying to piece together what happened." Corey's head spun. He had just been there. Mr. Holloway had been fine when he left. And now he was in the hospital. "You think I had something to do with it?" Corey asked, his voice quieter than before. Tanner was quick to shake his head. "No one's accusing you of anything. We just need to know if you saw or heard anything unusual while you were at his house." Corey frowned, replaying the events in his head. No, nothing seemed weird. He was surprised I brought the wallet back, but that's about it. "Did he say anything to you? Something that might suggest he was worried about someone?" Rise pressed. Corey hesitated, thinking. "He did say something strange. He told me I reminded him of someone he once knew." Rise raised an eyebrow. "That's it?" Corey nodded. "Yeah. Then he offered to buy me a milkshake sometime, but that's all." Tanner scribbled something in his notepad. "Did you notice if anyone was watching you when you walked up to his house?" The memory flickered in Corey's mind. That feeling. Like someone had been watching him. His pulse picked up. I don't know. I felt like someone was looking at me, but I didn't see anyone." The detectives exchanged another glance. "All right," Ray said. "We may have more questions later, but if you think of anything else, don't hesitate to call." She handed his mother a card. "We'll be in touch." Vanessa took the card, her lips pressed into a thin line. "Thank you, officers." As the door closed behind them, Corey turned to his mom, his hands shaking slightly. "What if someone saw me go to his house?" he whispered. "What if they think I took something?" His mother pulled him into a tight hug. "You did the right thing, baby. No matter what happens, we'll handle this together." But even as she reassured him, Corey couldn't shake the heavy feeling in his chest. Because in the pit of his stomach, he knew this wasn't over. Later that day, at school, the news spread faster than wildfire. Corey barely made it to his locker before Marcus, his best friend, caught up to him. "Yo, man, I heard the cops came to your house this morning. What's going on?" Marcus asked, lowering his voice. Corey sighed, running a hand over his face. "I found a wallet yesterday and returned it to an old guy. Turns out, his house got broken into after I left. And now the cops are asking me questions." Marcus's eyes widened. "Bro, that's wild. You think they're looking at you?" Corey shook his head. "They said I'm not a suspect, but still, it feels like everyone's looking at me weird today." Sure enough, as he turned, he caught a few students whispering and glancing in his direction. "That's the kid the cops came for," he heard someone murmur. "You think he had something to do with it?" another voice said. Corey's jaw clenched. Great, just great. As the day dragged on, Corey couldn't focus. His mind kept returning to Mr. Holloway. Why would someone break into his house? What were they looking for? And more importantly, was Corey somehow caught up in something bigger than he realized? That night. Later that evening, Corey sat on his bed, staring at the detective's card on his desk. He kept replaying the scene in his head. The way Mr. Holloway had looked at him. The feeling of being watched. Then something clicked. The house had seemed too quiet when he arrived. The porch light had been flickering weakly, like someone had messed with it. And hadn't Mr. Holloway hesitated before opening the door? What if the break-in had already started before Corey even knocked? A chill ran down his spine. If that was true, then whoever had broken into Mr. Holloway's house had seen him there. Which meant they knew who he was, and they might be coming for him next. Accusations and doubts. The tension in the air was suffocating. Corey Mitchell could feel the weight of every whisper, every side glance, and every skeptical look that followed him through the hallways of Westwood High School. By lunchtime, the rumors had taken on a life of their own. "I heard he broke into the old man's house after giving the wallet back." "Nah, man. They say the dude was already there when it happened. Maybe he saw something. Or maybe he was in on it." Corey clenched his fists as he dumped his tray into the cafeteria bin, his appetite long gone. He was used to being the quiet, hard-working kid, the one people respected but didn't always notice. But now he was the center of attention for all the wrong reasons. Marcus caught up to him outside by the basketball courts, his expression serious. "Yo, you gotta say something, man. People are acting like you robbed the guy." Corey exhaled sharply. "And what do you want me to say? That I just happened to return the wallet, and then somebody else broke in. You think they'll believe me?" Marcus hesitated. "I do. But you gotta admit, it looks bad." Corey knew that. He really did. And the worst part, somewhere deep in his gut, he couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't a coincidence. That evening, a visit to the hospital. When Corey got home, his mother was already waiting for him. "You're not going to let this rest, are you?" she asked, arms crossed. He shook his head. "I need to see Mr. Holloway. I need to know what happened." His mother sighed. "All right, but I'm coming with you." A short drive later, they arrived at St. Mary's Hospital. The sterile smell of disinfectant filled the air as they walked through the halls. Corey's heart pounded as they approached room 317. When they stepped inside, Corey felt a wave of relief. Mr. Holloway was awake. His face was bruised, and his left arm was wrapped in a sling, but his eyes still carried the same warmth Corey had seen the day before. "Well, if it isn't my good luck charm," Mr. Holloway said, a weak smile tugging at his lips. "Didn't expect to see you so soon, kid." Corey stepped forward cautiously. "Mr. Holloway, what happened?" The old man sighed, shifting slightly in his hospital bed. "Wish I knew. I was getting ready for bed when I heard a noise at the back door. Next thing I know, 2 men in masks were in my living room, yelling at me, demanding something I didn't have." Corey frowned. What were they looking for? Mr. Holloway's face darkened. "They kept asking about a letter. Said I was hiding something." Corey's breath hitched. "A letter?" The old man nodded slowly. "But I don't know what they were talking about. I told them I had nothing, but they didn't believe me. One of them hit me, knocked me out cold." Corey exchanged a glance with his mother. A letter. That didn't make sense. And yet, something wasn't right. "Mr. Holloway," Corey hesitated, "did you see who they were?" The old man shook his head. "No, they were careful. But I'll tell you this, one of them had a deep scar on his left hand. I saw it when he reached for my wallet." Corey's blood ran cold. Whoever had broken in had been looking for something. And now, they were out there, thinking Mr. Holloway had it. The warning. That night, Corey lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Something gnawed at him. The letter. Had Mr. Holloway's wallet been planted for Corey to find? If the burglars had been searching for something valuable, why wouldn't they have taken the cash in his wallet? Unless they had wanted someone else to find it first. A chill crawled down his spine. Suddenly, a soft tap at his window made him freeze. His breath caught in his throat. Another tap. Slowly, Corey slid out of bed and tiptoed toward the window. Peeling back the curtain, his heart stopped. A figure stood just beyond the backyard fence, watching. His pulse thundered in his ears. For a moment, the figure didn't move. Then, deliberately, they raised a hand with a deep scar on it. Corey's breath hitched. It was one of them. Before he could react, the figure turned and disappeared into the shadows. Corey stood there, his hands trembling. This wasn't just a misunderstanding anymore. Someone out there thought he had what they were looking for. And they were coming for him next. A dangerous discovery. Corey stood frozen at the window, his breath shallow, his heart pounding so hard it felt like it might burst from his chest. The figure was gone. The backyard was still, bathed in the eerie glow of the streetlight. But Corey knew what he had seen. The scared hand, the silent stare, the deliberate way the man had made sure Corey saw him before disappearing into the darkness. This wasn't some random break-in. This was a warning. Corey backed away from the window, his hands trembling. He needed to tell someone. But who? The police. They already had questions about him. His mom. She'd probably lock him in the house for the next month. He sank onto his bed, gripping his knees. This all started with that wallet, and Mr. Holloway's mention of a letter. Whatever these men were looking for, they were convinced Corey had it now. And if he didn't figure out what was going on soon, he might be next. The investigation begins. The next morning, Corey barely touched his breakfast. His mother had noticed his unease but didn't press him about it. She had enough to worry about. But Corey had made a decision. He needed to go back to Mr. Holloway's house. It wasn't just curiosity anymore. If those men thought he had something, then maybe, just maybe, he could find it first. After school, he told Marcus what had happened. "Dude, wait, you mean one of those guys was outside your house?" Marcus whispered as they walked toward Maple Street. Corey nodded. "I don't know what they want, but I think it has to do with something at Mr. Holloway's house." "Bro," Marcus said, shaking his head, "this is next level crazy. You sure we shouldn't go to the cops?" Corey sighed. "And tell them what?" "That some dude stood outside my house for a few minutes. That I think something is hidden at Mr. Holloway's place. They'd just think I was making stuff up." Marcus looked uneasy, but nodded. "All right, but if things get sketchy, we're out." By the time they reached Mr. Holloway's house, the street was quiet. The old brick house looked the same as before, except this time, the police line, "Do not cross" taped, stretched across the front door. Corey's stomach tightened. He hadn't expected that. "We can't just walk in," Marcus whispered. Corey scanned the area. Then he noticed something. The backyard fence was slightly open. "Come on," Corey said, leading the way. Marcus grumbled but followed. They slipped through the backyard, stepping carefully through the overgrown grass. The back door was still locked, but Corey spotted an open basement window. "You gotta be kidding me," Marcus groaned. "Stay here if you want," Corey said, hoisting himself up and sliding inside. A moment later, Marcus grunted and followed. "I swear, if I get arrested because of you." The basement smelled of dust and old wood. Corey clicked on his phone's flashlight and swept it across the room. Boxes lined the walls, covered in years of neglect. An old workbench sat against the far end. Tools rusted from time. "What exactly are we looking for?" Marcus whispered. "I don't know," Corey admitted. "But if there's something hidden, it's gotta be here somewhere." They searched in silence for a while, rifling through boxes, opening drawers. Nothing. Until Corey's flashlight hit the floorboards. One of them was slightly lifted at the edge. His breath caught. He knelt down and pressed against it. The board creaked but didn't budge. "Help me," Corey whispered. Marcus sighed but joined him. Together, they pried at the edges until the board popped loose. Inside the small gap beneath, there was a single envelope. Corey's hands trembled as he picked it up. It was old, the paper yellowed at the edges, the handwriting on the front faded but still legible. It said, "To Bernard Holloway, for your eyes only." The letter. Corey swallowed hard. He had found it. But what was so important about a simple letter? Marcus nudged him. "Well, open it." Corey carefully peeled back the worn flap and unfolded the paper inside. His eyes scanned the words, and what he read made his stomach drop. "Bernard, if you're reading this, it means I didn't make it. There's something you need to know about the bank robbery all those years ago. It wasn't just about money. It was about evidence. The people behind it weren't just thieves. They were covering up something bigger. Corruption, fraud, crimes they didn't want the world to know about. Asterisk, asterisk, I was supposed to turn over what I knew to the authorities, but I got scared. Instead, I hid the proof inside the safety deposit box at Westwood National Bank. But if this letter has surfaced, then someone else has figured out that you were my last contact. That means they're coming. I hope you never have to read this, but if you do, protect yourself. And if you can, tell the truth. James Connolly. Corey's hands shook as he finished reading. This wasn't just a random robbery. The men who attacked Mr. Holloway weren't after money. They were after this. Proof of something much, much bigger. Bro, Marcus whispered, eyes wide. This is insane. Corey swallowed. We have to get out of here. Now. He tucked the letter inside his jacket and turned toward the basement window. But just as he reached it, the back door creaked open. Corey and Marcus froze. Footsteps. Someone was inside the house. And then, a voice. I know you're in here, kid. Corey's blood turned to ice. They had been followed. And now, they were trapped. Running out of time. Corey Mitchell held his breath as the footsteps grew closer. The basement was dark, the air thick with dust, but none of that mattered. All Corey cared about was the voice, the deep, gravelly tone that had called out from above. I know you're in here, kid. The man wasn't guessing. He knew. Corey stole a glance at Marcus, who was as frozen as he was. His friend's eyes were wide with fear, and for good reason. They were trapped. The basement window was too high for a quick escape, and the only exit was upstairs, where the intruder was. Think, Corey, think. His fingers tightened around the letter hidden in his jacket. This was what they were after. And now that he had it, he was in serious danger. A slow, deliberate creak echoed through the basement as someone stepped onto the stairs. They were coming down. Corey's pulse thundered in his ears. He and Marcus had to move. Now. He grabbed Marcus's wrist and whispered, Follow me. Stay quiet. They crouched low and slunk behind a stack of old crates. The dim light from Corey's phone barely illuminated the path as they moved deeper into the basement. His heart pounded so hard he was afraid the intruder would hear it. The footsteps continued down the stairs. Then, a deep voice. You shouldn't have come back here, kid. Corey's breath hitched. The man knew exactly who he was. Marcus tugged on his sleeve, whispering urgently, What do we do, man? Corey scanned the basement, desperate for an escape. His eyes landed on something, a rusted utility door on the far wall. It looked old. Maybe it led outside. He pointed toward it. That way, he mouthed. Marcus nodded. But just as they started moving, a metallic click. Corey stiffened. A gun. The man had pulled a gun. Enough games, the voice growled. Come out now, or I start shooting. Marcus let out a strangled breath. Corey felt like ice was creeping through his veins. Then the man took another step forward. Corey acted on instinct. He grabbed a loose brick from the floor and hurled it toward the opposite side of the basement. It crashed into a pile of old metal pipes with a loud clatter. The distraction worked. The man whipped around, his attention diverted for a split second. Just enough time. Go, Corey hissed. They sprinted toward the utility door. Corey reached it first and yanked on the handle. It was stuck. Come on, he muttered, tugging frantically. Marcus shoved against the door with his shoulder. The rusted hinges groaned. Behind them, the man realized his mistake. He turned back just as the door burst open, and Corey and Marcus lunged through. They tumbled onto damp earth, rolling into the backyard. The cool night air hit Corey's face as he scrambled to his feet. Run, Marcus yelled. They bolted. Behind them, the basement door slammed open. Corey didn't dare look back. He didn't need to. He could hear the man chasing them, his heavy boots pounding against the ground. Corey's lungs burned as he sprinted down the alley behind Mr. Holloway's house, zigzagging through trash cans and old crates. The street ahead was empty, no one to help them. Then a car engine roared to life. Corey's stomach dropped. The man had backup. Headlights flared as a black sedan peeled out of a side street, tires screeching. It was coming straight for them. Split up, Corey shouted. Marcus veered left toward an old construction site. Corey turned right, sprinting toward a cluster of abandoned buildings. The car swerved after him. Panic surged through his veins. They weren't just trying to scare him. They wanted to stop him, permanently. Cornered, Corey ducked into an alley, pressing himself against a graffiti-covered wall. His chest heaved. He could still hear the car idling nearby. They were looking for him. His mind raced. What now? He still had the letter tucked into his jacket. That was why they were after him. If he could just get to the police, maybe. The sound of footsteps. Corey froze. A shadow stretched along the alley floor. Then, "Going somewhere, kid." Corey spun around. The man with the scarred hand stood at the alley's entrance, blocking his only way out. His heart hammered. The man smirked. "You made a big mistake coming back to that house." Corey's fingers tightened around the letter in his pocket. He had two options, fight or run. His body tensed, ready to sprint. But the man lunged first. Corey barely dodged in time. He stumbled backward, his shoulders slamming into the brick wall. "Give me the letter," the man growled. Corey shook his head, swallowing hard. "I don't have it." The man's eyes darkened. "Lying's a bad habit, kid." He reached for something under his jacket. A weapon. Corey's mind screamed. Then, a loud "Kurake." The man stumbled forward, groaning. Standing behind him was Marcus, holding a metal pipe. Corey's eyes widened. "Dude, don't just stand there. Run," Marcus yelled. Corey didn't need to be told twice. He and Marcus bolted out of the alley, their legs burning as they sprinted toward the only safe place Corey could think of. The police station. The chase ends. By the time they reached the station, both boys were gasping for breath. Corey practically burst through the doors. "We need to talk to Detective Rice. Now." The officer at the desk blinked in surprise. "Slow down, son. What's going on?" Corey pulled out the letter. "This," he panted. "This is what they're after." The officer's eyes narrowed. "Who's after you?" Marcus turned, glancing anxiously at the door. "Some serious dudes, and they're probably still looking for us." The officer immediately reached for his radio. "Get Detective Rice down here now." Minutes later, Detective Rice appeared, her sharp eyes locking onto Corey. "You again," she said. "What's going on this time?" Corey handed her the letter. She unfolded it, scanning the contents. Her expression changed. "This," she murmured. "This is about the Westwood Bank case, the one that was never solved." She looked up, her face deadly serious. "You boys just stepped into something very, very big." Corey swallowed. He already knew that. The question was, how deep did this go? And was he in too deep to get out? The truth comes out. Detective Ray's sharp eyes flickered over the letter again, her lips pressing into a tight line. The tension in the air was thick, suffocating, as Corey and Marcus sat across from her in the small police station interrogation room. Corey's hands were still trembling, his heart pounding from the chase. His mind raced. Would Reyes actually believe them? Would this letter finally prove that he wasn't involved in the break-in? She exhaled slowly, looking at the two boys. "You have no idea how much trouble you just walked into." Marcus let out a nervous laugh. "Oh, I think we do." Reyes gave him a sharp look. "This letter is a missing piece to a 20-year-old case. James Connolly was a whistleblower. He worked at Westwood National Bank before it was robbed. That robbery was never solved. Now you're telling me you found this, a letter saying it wasn't just about money." Corey nodded, swallowing hard. "Yeah, and someone really, really doesn't want it to be found." Reyes tapped her fingers on the table. "Who are these guys that were after you?" Marcus scoffed. "We didn't exactly exchange business cards." "They weren't amateurs," Corey added. "One of them had a scar on his hand. He and another guy broke into Mr. Holloway's house looking for that letter. They thought he had it." Reyes' expression darkened. "And now they think you have it." Corey nodded. "Yeah, And they weren't just trying to scare me. They were going to kill me. Ray stood up, motioning toward the door. Stay here. Marcus blinked. Where else would we go? She left the room, and the two boys sat in silence. Corey let out a deep breath, rubbing his face. Marcus nudged him. Bro, what if this is bigger than just those guys? What if the whole bank thing was an inside job? Corey's stomach twisted. What if he was right? They didn't have time to think about it, though, because seconds later, Ray has returned with Officer Tanner behind her. All right, she said. We're bringing you two into protective custody until we can figure out who's behind this. You're not safe out there. Corey's chest tightened. What about my mom? They know where I live. Ray's eyes softened. We're already sending officers to her. We'll keep her safe. Corey felt some of the tension in his chest release. But he wasn't really safe. Not until whoever was behind all of this was caught. Unraveling the mystery. The next morning, Corey woke up in a secure location, a motel just outside of town, guarded by two officers. Marcus had crashed on the couch. He was still out cold. Corey, on the other hand, hadn't slept much. His mind kept turning over the same question. Who were these guys? Why now, after all these years, were they suddenly so desperate to find this letter? He sat up, reaching for his phone. If James Connolly had hidden something in a safety deposit box, maybe it was still there. Maybe it could expose everything. His hands hovered over the keyboard before he hesitated. Was he really about to Google information about corrupt criminals while sitting in a police-protected motel? Probably a bad idea. Still, he needed answers. Instead, he texted Mr. Holloway. Hey, it's Corey. Are you okay? A few minutes passed before his phone buzzed. I'm all right, kid, but I need to see you. Urgent. Corey's stomach dropped. Mr. Holloway was still in the hospital. How could he possibly help? Another buzz. Don't trust everyone. Some of them are inside men. His hands froze over the keyboard. Inside men. A chill ran down his spine. Did that mean? Before he could think, the motel door burst open. A police officer stepped inside. Corey's breath caught. Something felt wrong. The officer wasn't wearing a badge, and he had a scar on his left hand. Corey's blood turned to ice. Kid, the man said, smirking, you've been asking too many questions. The escape. Corey's mind snapped into survival mode. He lunged backward, shoving Marcus. Run. Marcus jolted awake, groggy. What? The scared man lunged. Corey threw the nearest thing he could grab, a motel lamp. It shattered against the man's shoulder, buying them seconds. They bolted toward the back exit. More footsteps pounded outside. More men. Marcus swore. Dude, what the? Who are these guys? Corey didn't answer. He just ran. They tore through the back alley, their shoes slapping against the wet pavement. Gunshots cracked behind them. Corey's heart raced. He ducked behind a dumpster. Marcus huffed, trying to catch his breath. I am, officially, done with this. Man. Corey peeked around the corner. We have to get to Mr. Holloway. He knows something. Marcus wiped sweat off his forehead. Yeah. And what if these guys are waiting for us there? Corey exhaled. Then we fight back. The final confrontation. They made it to the hospital in record time, slipping inside before anyone could stop them. Mr. Holloway's room was on the 3rd floor. They took the stairs 2 at a time. Corey burst through the door. Mr. Holloway. The old man looked up, his eyes sharp despite his injuries. You weren't followed. Corey shook his head. I don't think so. But we don't have much time. Mr. Holloway exhaled. I was right. They were watching the police. I knew they had inside men. Corey's heart pounded. Who are they? Mr. Holloway's gaze darkened. The robbery. It was never just about money. Some of the bank executives were involved. They covered it up, but James Connolly found out. He was going to go public until they killed him. Corey's stomach dropped. They made it look like an accident, Mr. Holloway continued. And the proof, the real proof, is in that deposit box. The letter was just a clue. Suddenly, the door burst open. The scared man, a gun in his hand. "You should have stayed out of this, kid," he snarled. Corey steeled himself. Not this time. Before the man could react, Corey grabbed the IV stand beside Mr. Holloway's bed and swung. It crashed into the gunman's arm, sending the weapon skidding across the floor. Marcus dived for it. The scared man lunged. But before he could grab Marcus, a gunshot rang out. The man froze, then collapsed. Corey turned, his chest heaving. Detective Reyes stood in the doorway, her gun still raised. "Guess I showed up just in time," she said. Corey let out a shaky breath. It was finally over. The aftermath. The corrupt bank executives were arrested. The missing files in the safety deposit box exposed everything. Mr. Holloway was safe. And Corey, he wasn't just a suspect anymore. He was a hero. As he sat on his porch that night, staring up at the stars, he felt something he hadn't in a long time. Hope. Maybe doing the right thing wasn't always easy, but it always mattered, and that was enough.